Well, I hope that you guys are ready for Easter. I'm sure that most of you guys are. I can't imagine too many of you begrudging having a week and a half break, but I hope that it's a good window and a good time of getting to step back a little bit, especially to think about what Christ has done for us. But as we start part two and wrap things up here, want to turn our attention, like I said at the end of part one, to what was going to be happening in Europe. The Germans are at this point still on the offensive. They've moved toward Russia. And as they start moving through the eastern, or I'm sorry, the western part of Russia, they realize that this is not going to go very quickly or ultimately very well. Because as it gets colder and colder, one of the things that we talked about is we spoke about the French Revolution, and especially Napoleon heading into Russia. I told you that he faced a an opponent that was unbeaten. Not only then, but I would say throughout most of history, and Napoleon is going to be crushed by the same enemy, the same opponent that is going to face Hitler here in 1941 slash early 42, and that, of course, is the brutal cold of Russia. As we think about it stopping Napoleon, we're also going to see it stopping the German advance toward the end of 41 and into 42. They had gotten within 19 miles of Moscow, and it seemed like things could end up where they would now take over, but instead they're going to be turned away because the tanks that they were using, the oil would literally freeze within the lines and they were unable to keep moving forward. You can see these guys kind of stuck in the snow, and because of that, they have to turn around. As a result, you're going to see the Russians saying this is the time to launch back. They mount a counterattack and they were going to push Germany um, back west. The Germans said, you know what, this is not worth our effort. This is not going to be something that is easily won. And so instead, they're going to focus on the dominance of Europe specifically. Going forward, they want to now crush the will, the spirit of Europe. As we talked about last time, the Germans have pretty well annihilated the French. They've controlled much of France, even getting around the Maginot Line, which wasn't much of a defensive tool for the French. But now the Germans are going to focus their attention on England, the island nation of Britain, the foe of Germany. The main thing that they start off with is London. And they began bombing the stew out of London. It's called the London Blitz. And over about a 6 month window, where basically every single night the Germans are going to bomb London. There's three main targets that they're aiming for. First of all, they're trying to take out factories, the lifeblood of the war effort on the island of Britain. They're also trying to take out the airfields because during this window, which we'll talk about at the end of this slide, this is all part of what is called the Battle of Britain. And the airfields are where the pilots would be able to take off to then try to defend the island from the German attack. The third thing is going to be the main communication tool that the Britons have, which is called the BBC. We have ABC. This is going to be the British Broadcasting Corporation. This is how the Prime Minister and the Queen both communicate with the citizens of Britain. At this time, you guys, I think, are largely aware the Prime Minister is Winston Churchill, cigar smoking, kind of rough and tumble guy. A guy who said never, never, never give up. Well, that inspires the British people. Again, knowing that not only their queen, but also their prime minister are for them. At this point, we're going to see, and I said queen, I meant the king at this point. Some of you guys maybe have seen the king's speech. This was all kind of in this window. But as we think about what was going to be happening here, we're going to see the British people hunkering down. What you're going to see on the lower right there are going to be during the Blitz, people would find somewhere to protect themselves. This is going to be in the tube, which is there subway system. I don't know how many of you guys have been to London, but the tube is all this underground, they call it, where they're going to connect the whole city. It's an amazing mass transit system. It's very, very efficient. But this is where, on many a night, the Britons would go to protect themselves because it was underground. This was going to be a safe place. But on the left, you can see the Germans flying through anti aircraft fire looking to now bomb the English. After this doesn't force an immediate surrender from the Britons, you're going to see Hitler saying, we're going to turn up the volume a little bit more and we're just going to bomb across the entire island. We're going to try to inflict as much damage and punishment as we can. There's going to be thousands killed and millions of dollars that are going to be uh, taken out in terms of damage by the Germans. But at the end of it, you're going to see the English prevailing. They show resolve, and it's not to say that the French somehow were weaker, but again, I think there's something uniquely respectable and amazing about the British that they were able to hang in there. This is all part of the Battle of Britain. I want to share a small clip with you. It's a couple minutes. It's from the Chronicles of Narnia. Some of you guys have seen that. But again, just to kind of show you the intensity of these individuals getting bombed. Now, the characters in the movie, some of you guys have seen that early scene, they don't go into the tube, but some of the citizens would have their own air raid shelters that they would be able to scurry into once the sirens went off. So here we go. This is the early part of, I think, the opening scene of the Chronicles of Narnia. Here we go.
You just do as you're told.
If you've ever read the books or watched the movie, you know it's because of World War II that they end up going out to the countryside to live at this professor's mansion, and it's there that the wonders of Narnia begin, at least for the Pevensey kids. Well, I want to now finish things up with one of the things that I have enjoyed studying very much over the years, and hopefully I'll do it justice even today as we think about the attack at Normandy. But the Russians again have pushed back the um, fighting in Africa, northern Africa, has not gone terribly well for the Germans, but now they're realizing that there's a good chance that some type of invasion, some type of pushback might happen even in France. The Allied commanders, led by General Eisenhower, have been planning something called Operation Overlord for over a year. They understand that this could be the seminal moment in being able to turn the tide of the war, at least in the European theater. The Pacific theater was another story, but this could be the moment to now see things begin to shift. The original plan had been to drop in or have the main attack be the 5th of June of 1944. But the night before and into the 5th, it was going to be very stormy weather. Some of you guys might know that the main way that they were going to come to France was across the English Channel. And because of the bad weather across the channel, and even for the planes that would be dropping troops in behind the line, they scrapped the plan. So you can imagine being a soldier, and we'll talk about these troops, but parachuting in behind the lines and being completely amped, ready to go the night before, only to have that then scrapped because of weather. It had to be just this super high and then kind of like, what do I do now? But the very next day, as many of you guys know, June 6th of 1944 was one of, if not the biggest battle that has ever happened. It was just incredible to think about the manpower that was going to be happening. First of all, the paratroopers are going to drop in. One of the main groups is going to be the 101st Airborne of the United States, the Screaming Eagles, who were supposed to go in behind the lines some hours before and soften up the line that the Germans had. Their goal was to come in from behind and attack so that the Americans and the English and the Canadians that would be landing on the beaches of Normandy, France, would have an easier time. Some of that was very successful. Others, the landing was completely strewn across the French countryside, and because of that, maybe not quite as successful. But it was a harrowing thing, to be sure, to be dropped in behind the line and then work back toward the beaches. Their goal, again, was to soften up those targets. They had pillboxes, these machine gun nests that were trained down on the beaches. Their goal, again, the paratroopers, was to knock out some of those soldiers so the attacking troops coming in from the channel would be able to have an easier go of it. As they hit the beaches, though, you're going to see five main beaches. Two of them were going to be more American based in terms of where the Americans would be landing. That, of course, is going to be Utah and Omaha. But then the other three, as you guys can see, there are going to be Gold, Sword, and Juno. Those are British troops, those are Canadian troops, and basically everybody else. It was an amazing grouping of soldiers that was going to hit the French beachhead that day. It's kind of interesting, again, just as an aside, after most of the troops have landed, some of the Canadians, this is how wacky they are, even rode bicycles, like beach cruisers, I think, up onto the sand. But most of the soldiers had a very different experience on that day. The Germans had set up strong defenses. The main general, a guy that had earned his nickname of the Desert Fox in North Africa, a guy by the name of Erwin Rommel, one of the most respected generals of the German side during World War II, had orchestrated and planned out this whole defensive system there. They had anti-tank barriers, even mines in the water that were going to make it more difficult to land. It was going to be very well planned out, but most of the soldiers at that point, they didn't think that they were going to attack for a while, and so there wasn't really strong troops. Some of the older guys or younger guys were going to be based at that location of Normandy. And so even though there was strong physical defenses, the men that were going to be defending it, even though they were extremely deadly in terms of the numbers, they were not the top soldiers that the Germans had. Even still, the fighting was going to be brutal. If you guys have ever seen Saving Private Ryan, you've seen the awful nature, just the death that was going to be facing these soldiers as they hit the beach. Um, I couldn't quite justify even showing a clip of that. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty powerful. In fact, some of the guys that landed at Normandy when the movie came out just wept in the theaters because of how realistic they felt like it portrayed that day. But by the end of the day, most of the beachhead was going to be taken by the Allied soldiers. They persevered despite all of these obstacles that the Germans threw at them, machine guns, the hill that they had to get up and get to the pillboxes. Again, it felt like everything was working against them on the French seaside. But by the end of the day of June 6, 1944, they had prevailed. Here are some of the images that were going to be from that day. In the top left, one of the most iconic pictures of D-Day. You're going to see soldiers making their way off of that landing craft into the Atlantic coast, that edge of the English Channel. You can see a dead soldier there in the top right. The lower left is going to be the rest of the Allies as they have taken the beaches. You're going to see these troop movers, and again, it looks like other support vehicles now making their way onto the beach. In the lower right is one of the most important guys, a guy by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the lead high command of these forces in this moment. He will become the U.S. president down the road, but here he is the American and Allied high command leading the charge for Operation Overlord. This is going to be the cemetery there at Omaha. It's just Normandy in general. It's a very important place, I think, as you think about the soldiers that died. Now, what's a little bit hard, you can't really see it. If you look carefully, you can. I don't have a pointer to be able to point it out, but there is one Star of David there. If you were a Jewish guy, instead of having a cross, they would put a Star of David to commemorate your passing. But many guys, many American guys, instead of being brought home, they were just buried there on the French countryside where they died. And again, families felt like that was pretty important. So, again, as we think about summer coming down the road here and thinking about June 6th of 1944, one of the most important days in terms of the American and British and Canadian, even the French people being liberated, all of this in the war effort, pretty significant. Well, when we come back from break, we'll be talking a little bit more about the end of the war, how it concludes. But before we get there, obviously Easter break is upon us. I hope that you guys have a wonderful time of relaxation, of being able to step back, but also celebrating what Jesus did for us 2,000 years ago. Many of you on Easter Sundays, as you've gone to church, have perhaps heard this many times. It's the pastor who will say, "He is risen." And many times those in attendance will say, as generations have before us, "He is risen indeed." Hopefully you guys know the joy of the risen Savior this Easter, even in these very weird and different times, more than you ever have before. I hope that you guys have a great Easter. I'll see you guys when we come back on the 20th. Take care.